Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the On Centerline podcast. Thank you for joining me today, whether you're listening on your regular podcast provider or here on YouTube. I'm glad to have you and really appreciate the reception that the podcast has been getting here on YouTube. So hopefully you've been getting a lot out of this, and please remember to share this with your friends. You know, I really want to get the word out about this channel and about the podcast. And hopefully if you find something helpful in any of these videos or any of these podcast episodes, someone you know will find it helpful as well. So I really appreciate those subscribes and those shares and those follows on the podcast and the YouTube channel. Anything you can do, just a little button click goes a long way to help the channel grow and the podcast grow and get the word out there. So, hey, today we're going to be talking about narration versus teaching. And this is kind of aimed at those CFIs out there. I know I've been doing a lot of CFI content lately. Hopefully this isn't lost on all of you who are pursuing perhaps private pilot, instrument, commercial, because whether or not you have ambitions to become a CFI in the future, hopefully this still has value for you and can help you throughout your training. But for you current CFIs or you aspiring CFIs out there, we're going to talk about narration versus teaching. And this is something I, again, bring up with my CFI candidates. There is a difference between narrating and teaching. And we're going to get into that for most intents and purposes. Narration is kind of the bare minimum, the bottom line bare minimum that a new CFI needs to be able to kind of demonstrate on a check ride in order to pass the check ride. Now, this is my opinion, and I'm not saying that this is the goal. I'm saying in general, most brand new CFIs, when they pass their check ride to be a CFI, can and should be able to, at the very minimum, narrate what they're doing. So that's kind of the bare minimum standard. And then we want to continue to grow our skills, and we want to work towards teaching as much as possible. And that certainly comes with time and experience. The closer we can get to doing that before our check rides, the better. It's really going to impress the DPs and your examiners. But at the very least, we need to be able to narrate. Now, what do I mean by this? So we are in the plane, and you are demonstrating different maneuvers, different landings, takeoffs, whatever it is. You need to be able to talk in real time as to what exactly you are doing in any given moment. For some people, this can come naturally, and for others, it takes a little longer. It's a little bit more difficult. But that's one of the things we practice, and I encourage all my students. So for all you students out there working on your private, instrument, commercial, whatever it is you're working on currently, I encourage all my students to talk out loud as they're doing things, because not only will this be a valuable skill later on should you choose to pursue your CFI certificate, but even just as a pilot, talking through things as you do them helps you organize those tasks in your mind and hopefully helps you achieve them, accomplish them easier, and not get behind the plane as much. Okay, so we want to talk through things as we're doing them. This is narration. We are doing something. For instance, I am pulling the throttle back. Now, most people will just pull the throttle back. I know for those of you listening on the podcast, you can't see what I'm doing. But the whole point is they're not talking. They're just being quiet, and they're just pulling that throttle back without saying anything. That can be all well and good. But depending on what you're doing, and depending on who else is with you, like an examiner, when you go and take a check ride, you may or may not be doing all the right things, or you may be doing the right things in a way that the examiner doesn't expect you to be doing them. And so by talking through what you're doing, it keeps everybody on the same page. This applies to check rides. It applies just to the airline, like the multi-crew environment. It is critical that a crew, whether it's 2, 3, 4 people, are always on the same page. That's why there's standardized call-outs, things like that, when you get into the professional pilot world. Okay, it's to keep everyone on the same page. So by talking out loud through what you're doing, especially if it's something that maybe the DP doesn't expect you to be doing or isn't sure why you're doing it, can go a long way to keeping them on the same page and prevent them from having any, any doubts in your ability or your skill. So that helps no matter what certificate or rating you're working on. But as a CFI, it is the bare minimum and expectation that you are able to talk through what you're doing as you're doing it in real time. Okay, so that's narration. And in just a second here, we're going to do an example of what it would look like to do narration versus teaching. So teaching then takes it to the next step. Teaching, as we talked about last week or 2 weeks ago, however long ago it was, when we talked about the what, why, how model, right? Narration is basically the what. This is what I'm doing. I am pulling the throttle back. I am holding altitude. I am putting flaps in. I am doing this. That is what. That is the what side of things. You're just saying what you're doing. Teaching doesn't begin until at least the why. So when we are doing these things, we want to say, okay, I'm doing this. And then if you're able to, in the moment, again, this is the hard part about teaching. This is the hard part about being a CFI, is you have to be able to do these things and speak to them in real time. And that's why pre-flight briefings are so important, as well as post-flight briefings. But if the student has a good idea of what they're going to be doing getting into a lesson, it'll make more sense in the moment, even if you're not able to fully articulate in real time what's going on. Because it can be hard. I mean, things move fast. We know things move fast in the airplane. Being able to physically get the words out in time, it can be hard. And most of my students probably feel like I'm just like rambling on because I'm trying to keep up with everything they should be doing or should be seeing or feeling and doing it in real time. So the teaching is, okay, here's what I'm doing. Here's why I'm doing it. Okay. And then of course the how, and here's how I'm doing it. Here's the what I'm doing, why I'm doing it, and how I'm doing it. And then showing them the result of that. Here's the what, here's the why, here's the how, here's the end result. Okay. So we're going to use, let's just go back to steep turns. I know we talked about steep turns when we talked about what, why, how. We also talked about slow flight, but I'm going to give you an example of simply narrating, and then I'm going to give you an example of what it might sound like to be teaching while you narrate. Okay? Now, understand we talked about the importance of pre-flight briefings. A lot of the things that I might be saying, or some of the things I might be saying, are assuming that you have talked about certain concepts already on the ground, that the student is coming into this lesson with a certain understanding of these concepts prior to getting to this point. Okay. So narrating, if I was going to do a steep turn and narrate it, I would simply say, okay, we've cleared the area. We've done our clearing turns and we're ready to do the maneuver. Here I go. I'm banking, going over to the left, 45 degrees of bank. There we are. Adding power. Okay, I'm holding my sight picture. I'm holding my altitude. I'm holding back pressure. Okay, we're coming around. Airspeed's looking good. okay, we're coming around. There's our spot. I'm rolling out. I'm using rudder. And there's your steep turn. Maneuver complete. That's narration. It's just saying what you're doing as you're doing it. Okay? And again, for any pilot, private, commercial, instrument, this goes a long way to help you stay in the moment mentally, to help you kind of talk yourself through the maneuver. And I highly recommend doing it. Okay? Talk out loud. It will only help you. But for a CFI to do that, well, it's not really teaching. The student isn't really getting much out of that per se. They're just, okay, that was nice. Like, they're like, okay, golf clap, I guess. Thank you for showing me that. Okay. But that's narration. So now let's look at what the same scenario might look like or sound like while we teach it rather than just narrate it. Okay, we've done our clearing turns. We're going to be doing steep turns here. Area is clear. We're going to be going to the left first. Okay, we've cleared the left. Here we go. We're going to roll into the turn by applying an aileron pressure, making sure we add right rudder to counter that adverse yaw and keep the turn coordinated. Okay, we're getting over to our 45 degrees of bank. Now I'm having to add a significant amount of back pressure because we lost that vertical lift by banking into our turn. Our horizontal lift's pulling us through the turn now. We're holding the back pressure to create more lift so that we don't lose altitude. You can see that our altitude is staying the same. I've added power as we rolled into this because that extra lift we created also created drag. So we're adding a little bit of power to maintain our airspeed throughout this turn. Okay, we're keeping coordinated as we come through the turn. We're looking outside at our sight picture. As we come around to our point, we're going to start rolling out. Okay, we're rolling out. We're using right aileron pressure with right rudder to counter that adverse yaw, keeping the plane coordinated and pulling that power out so we don't speed up or climb, because now we're taking that horizontal lift and putting it back into the vertical direction. So we got to relax our back pressure. We got to take the power out so that we don't climb or speed up. And that's your steep turn. All right, so that's definitely the what. That's all the what's in there, what we're doing. But it's also more of the whys and somewhat the hows. All right. That's like the level that we want to be aiming for. Okay. And again, I'm not saying that's the end all be all, what I just said, but it's the direction we always want to be working in and going in. All right. There's a great book out there called Telling is Not Teaching. Let me look it up real quick. All right, here it is. Telling is Not Teaching by Mike Thompson. It's the Flight Instructor's Handbook. I can put a link to this in the video description below, but you can find it. I personally like audiobooks, so you can find this on Audible, and it's a great resource for all flight instructors out there or just teachers. But telling is not teaching, and that's essentially kind of what we're talking about here, is that narrating, just saying what you're doing, is not teaching your student how to do it. So narration is important, and it's important from day one of pilot training. Okay, again, talking yourself through everything you're doing. It's going to go a long way to helping you be successful. But when we get to the CFI level, while it is kind of the bare minimum you need to be able to do, it is not teaching, and we need to make sure that we're always incorporating the why as well as the how into what we are giving to our students. Okay, so keep that in mind. Check out the book Telling is Not Teaching by Mike Thompson. Okay, think about next time you're out with one of your students, or as you are practicing becoming a CFI, if you're a CFI candidate and you're practicing talking while you're flying the airplane, think to yourself, am I simply narrating right now, or am I actually teaching? Let me know what you think down in the comments, guys. I really appreciate you spending time with me today. Again, you can find my YouTube channel if you're listening on the podcast, Northwest Aeronaut on YouTube. And if you're on YouTube already, you can find the podcast On Centerline on all major podcast providers. Thanks for spending a part of your day with me today, and we will see you next time on Centerline.